with us today. And I think it'd be very helpful to those listeners to understand a bit of your history. So I'm just going to go through and sort of dot point that for everyone. And you probably might be slightly embarrassed by all the things that you have achieved. But for most of us mere mortals, it's probably 5 lifetimes to achieve what you've done in one. So if I can just sort of list those, you're a former City of Greater Geelong councillor and mayor. You're the former global corporate legal officer of Specsavers for the world. You're the former director of Barwon Water for 5 years. You've got degrees in law, economics, accounting, commerce, business administration, applied corporate governance, arts and military law. You currently are the honorary consul for the Republic of Slovenia in Victoria, Australia. You've been awarded the Australian OIM Award. You hold a senior rank in the Australian Defence Force as a Specialist Reserve Legal Officer. You're currently consulting and have director roles. In between times, you've found time to stand for Parliament, both at the federal and state levels for the Liberal Party. And my first question to you is, what drives you?
Yeah, thanks, David. Look, it all sounds like a very busy sort of a life, but if you think about it, it's an accumulation of 35 years. So you're working on these things as you do over a period of time. I guess what drives me, you'd have to go back to my background. I think if I really had to reflect back on what has been the motivation is coming from an ethnic background, as you may have gathered from my name, Srech Kontelj. It's not a common name here in Australia. In fact, it's probably not that common even in Slovenia. But my Christian name means lucky, which is Srečko or Sreća means lucky in Slovenian. And to that extent, I've had a lucky life in that my parents escaped from what was then socialist Yugoslavia in the 50s to search for a new life. So originally they left, well, not left, they escaped. In those days, you couldn't leave Yugoslavia, you had to escape. So they literally had to escape under the cover of darkness, and there was a real risk that they could get shot or at the very least imprisoned if they'd got caught. Anyway, they made their way into Italy as refugees, and then from Italy into France, where they lived for 2 years while they were waiting for a longer-term settlement solution. And they had the option of either Argentina or Australia and chose, thankfully for me, Australia. So I was born here a couple of years after that, and they initially settled in Cooma, where my father was working as an underground fitter and turner for the Snowy Mountains hydroelectricity scheme, and my mother was working as a cook for the same project, but based in Cooma. And then after a number of years, made their way to Geelong in the early 60s, where I was born. So I was born in a family where we didn't have a lot, but we had work ethic, because they had to establish themselves in a new country where they had no language skills, absolutely no family support network, and only the suitcase that they carried when they came to Australia as refugees. And I still got their travel documents from the day when that I came across just only recently when I was cleaning up the family home, because my father has now passed on. My mother's moved into a care facility. So I came across all those early travel documents, and it sort of brings the story right back to where we are now. So I grew up with the sense that to achieve, you had to take responsibility for your life, because there's nobody there to give you a hand up, or there was no little black book of connections into the world. So there was no private school situation. I grew up in Bell Park, which those of you who are based from a Geelong background was very much the ethnic suburb of Geelong, where all the new arrivals started. And my father was working at the Ford Motor Company as a fitter and turner. My mother was working variously in hospitality or in the textile industry, and then in the commercial market gardening industry. So all hard work, labouring, blue-collar work. But that was a terrific background, because I knew if I was going to make anything of myself, I'd have to rely upon myself. So that came from that background. But one thing that my parents were big supporters of was education. And you read out an array of qualifications that I've got. And I suppose the idea that education was the way out of my situation was something that my parents instilled in me. So whilst they didn't have much of an education, even back in Yugoslavia, because they grew up in the war years, and literally fighting was going on in the villages, and the Germans were coming and going. Both my grandfathers were involved with the war. My grandfather from my father's side was taken on force by the Americans and ended up in Africa and France fighting. And my other grandfather, despite his protestation, was taken by the Germans to act as a tailor for the German army, even though his allegiance was not to the Germans, but his skill set was something that they needed, and he was quite a linguist. So he saw the war out in that way. So education was something that I understood, or really, I suppose, understood. I took to it just by inclination. I enjoyed studying, but also I saw that this is a way out for me, and I applied myself. So from primary school, I went to the local high school, and from there to law school and beyond. So I guess the motivation was really from my background of, working class. I didn't know what a better life looked like here in Australia, because I only mixed in my own little circle of sort of the Slovenian club was my social set. But I had a sense that there must be another life beyond just what we were living in our little humble home there in Bell Park, Belpost Hill, and the labouring work that my parents did. And it was only when I went to uni, really, that I started, when I moved from Geelong up to Melbourne to do law school, that the world started to open up, and I started to mix with people from a different background, kids who had gone through private school background. And I was actually then grateful for my more humble beginnings, because I found that those kids who had gone through the private schools really struggled in the first year at university, where you had to be very much a self-starter. No one was spoon-feeding you at university, whereas I just continued to just
Work
study on
away.
my own. Yeah, make my own way through law school, whereas some of the other kids, I mean, mind you, it all settled down after a year or so, but initially they had a hard time of that sort of lifestyle, whereas for me it was just business as usual, where I was self-sufficient and took responsibility for myself. And pretty much that's how I've lived all my life, is just not to look for handouts, is to make my own way.
So you would find, I'm guessing, that the current world, where countries are making it extremely difficult for immigrants to move there. There is continuous debate amongst many Western world countries that, for want of a better word, in Australia, stop the boats. In the US, it's the same, the Southern Wall. It has a real political overtone. So how does that grate with you, or how does that make you reflect upon the current debate?
Look, I've got a view that, look, immigration, yes, it's great, but it has to be controlled at the same time. You can't have just open borders and people just freely coming into Australia in the way that may have been the case back in the 50s and 60s, when we're looking to grow the population. It was populate or perish. So of course, look, people from all around the world are looking to come to Australia as economic immigrants and economic refugees, because they can see the great lifestyle we have here in Australia, and they want to be part of that, and they can make a great contribution. But I think it's important for Australia to control its immigration program, to ensure that the people who are being allowed into Australia are able to fulfill roles that are needed here in Australia. And that's not to say that there isn't a role for the humanitarian element, but you can't have open border immigration. Otherwise, you'll find Australia will be completely overrun very quickly, because it's got such a great lifestyle to offer and great opportunities to offer. But also, you can't allow that sort of uncontrolled immigration without planning for it with the infrastructure and the services. Otherwise, you can very quickly destroy what is such a great country. And look, I get very annoyed when people put down Australia, and we saw it during the debate in the recent, and not wanting to be controversial, doesn't matter which way you voted, yes, no. What I didn't like about that referendum debate,
the referendum,
the voice debate.
Yes,
that's right. Just to be clear for listeners that maybe from around the world and so on, is the voice referendum debate was the focus was all about the negative sides of it, of Australian history and negative aspects of Australian life. When what I would have liked to have heard is all the positives that have been achieved and the positives that we all enjoy, and the potential that is available to everyone. Doesn't matter your background, as you saw from my background, completely public school, and that exists to this day. Our education system is such that it's how you apply yourself will determine where you end up, not where you start. And the university exams that occur, it's up to the student to apply themselves and achieve the best result they can get, and then they can get into any university in Australia based on their own merit. Of course, it helps if you go to a private school. There is a huge element of spoon feeding and great preparation, but that doesn't disqualify people who go to a public school like myself. If the student is determined and they apply themselves and they seek the help that is becoming more and more available through the education system, they can get to law school, they can get to medical school. It's all there for them. It really is. And that's why I don't like this putting down of Australia. For me, the focus should be the family, the community, and the country. And the country is Australia, and we've got a lot to be grateful for, given what else is on offer out there. So when we put ourselves down, I like to know, who are we comparing ourselves to? Yes. Because I don't know, and I've lived overseas, and as you heard, you mentioned, I'm the honorary consul for the Republic of Slovenia. So I've had lots of dealings all around the world, and I'm yet to find a country that gives you the opportunities that Australia does.
So I think they're very good points, Srech. And if I just sort of grab hold of one of those and sort of have a bit more of a discussion on that, and that's really about public discussion about, there's probably two parts to it. There is, you can spend a lot of time talking about fear and putting people down or putting issues down, or you can talk about opportunity and hope.
That's
and
right.
What you're really focusing on is saying, look, that debate spent too much time, at least with one side, who were very fear driven, and hope and opportunity is the far better way to go, is really what you're saying, because there's so much to be recognised that Australia has delivered for its people. It could, of course, deliver more, but it has delivered a lot compared to many other countries. Is that really where you're driving?
Look, I totally agree with you. Whether you're talking about yourself or whether you're talking about a country, what's going to determine the future is the present, and how you deal with the present will determine what your future is. You can get caught up and reassess and rehash the past, but it's not going to change the future. It's what you do now. So, of course, be aware of the past, but don't let the past drag you down. We could all get dragged down. Look, growing up with a name such as mine, Srech, and in the 1960s and 70s, of course, there was times where there was name calling and could I look for instances of discrimination and racism and so on? It doesn't enter my mind. I'm not, you can't define yourself and allow yourself to be defined by what may have happened in the past where people were less enlightened about the impact that words and the way that you're being treated may have on that person. You've got to rise yourself above that and focus on the future. And the only way to do that is to be very much in the present and work on the opportunities and the strengths that are here that you've got available to you. And in a country like Australia, we have a natural abundance of resources and wealth. Now, how we use that will determine the future. And there's a lot of public policy that is squandering that wealth and that opportunity. So, and it's not it's not even important how much resource you've got. It's what you do with that. But what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of wastage at government level, all levels of government, a lot of wastage on policies that are not really driving a positive agenda.
So for listeners or viewers who might be not particularly aware of Geelong and Victoria or even Australia, Srech currently is standing for a local council role. It's an election that's going to be held in October of this year. And Srech, of course, as I previously mentioned, has stood for the Liberal Party for both state and federal parliament. And I want to come to the local government role in a minute, but I'd like to touch on the federal and state political scene because, you know, you've had some experience in that area. And it would be easy to say that someone with your background, where you've come from a blue-collar family, education has made a difference to your life and your current and your future, that you might in fact end up as a very typical Labor member of Parliament, but you've sought to be a Liberal member of Parliament. And how did you sort of fall into that sort of space?
Look, I think I guess it was from the background of parents having escaped socialism and communism in Europe that I was more drawn to the side of politics that has a philosophy of self-responsibility, not relying upon big government, and in fact suspicious of government involvement in your personal life. And I think where we are at the moment, and we saw it during COVID, government virtually took over our life in a way that you couldn't have imagined. It was something like of the George Orwell 1984 proportion, and it's quite scary to see how we all just fell into compliance, where the government virtually on an hourly basis were telling us on the TV what we were allowed to do, what we couldn't do, where we could go, where we were not allowed, who we could associate with, where you can work, where you couldn't work. Like that was total control, of a scary magnitude. So for me, I guess that was, I suppose, the point is just my background of my parents coming to a country where they appreciated the freedom compared to where they'd come from, and they wanted to be as far away from communism and socialism as they possibly could, and that's where my politics, I guess, was first, I suppose, brought into my mindset. My family wasn't a political family, to be perfectly honest. It was just a hard-working family trying to make the best of the opportunity that Australia had. And my father was very passionate about Australia to the point where he considered it his home. He loved nothing better than the Australian bush. He loved nothing better than to spend time with country Australian people. And it just had this absolute love for this country. So I'm as passionate as Australian as anyone, and that's why I go back to the point I made earlier, David, where it upsets me when people put this country down.
Yes.
Really upsets me. And if given another opportunity in political life, I'll use that platform to make that point strongly, because I don't think it's being made enough. There are certain politicians who do speak up about it, but they're concerned that if you speak up too much in favour of Australia, that you somehow you're at risk of being cancelled because you're seen as being too nationalistic. But it's not about a matter of being nationalistic or suggesting that one group of people is more important than another. We are Australian. It's a multicultural country with a long history, Indigenous history. But what makes us successful is the fair go all round concept. And I don't believe that Australia is a racist country at all. Of course, there's going to be instances where there are certain people who are, but that's, in every walk of life, there's always the exception. But as a rule, I don't see Australians as a racist country whatsoever, even though I may have experienced some instances myself, in my early days. But it's not something that I then generalize to suggest that the country is a racist country, as was suggested by one ABC commentator recently. That is not an Australia that I recognise, and it's not an Australia that we everyday people, as you work your way through the community, see. We don't see that as a racist country.
Yes. So working through to the next step, which is about local government. So you're drawn back into an area that you've had a lot of experience with. You were a former councillor, you were a former mayor of the city of Greater Geelong, and you're standing again to take on that role. What keeps lighting your fire? Why do you want to go back?
I get frustrated by not being in a position where I can influence decision making if I feel that the right decisions are not being made. So that's what's frustrating me. I don't feel that we're maximising the potential for the city of Greater Geelong at the moment, and I believe that I could bring a unique skill set and experience back into the council that I feel is lacking. Having lived overseas for the 5 years most recently, until COVID brought me back, and had a very full life overseas, traveling all through the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland and all over Europe. I've picked up a lot of insights into the good and the bad of public governance, and seeing what's happening here, I just feel that I can make a contribution and in a leadership way that I don't believe is happening at the moment. And that's not to put anyone down. I'm not singling anyone out. I just say that as a general observation, and believe that with the benefit of having been on the council, now having been away for some 9 years, and then having lived the life that I was overseas, I think there is a contribution that I can make. And I'm at a point in my career where I can also put the time commitment into it, that also is not something that all the current councillors can do. They've got careers, they've got other lives, but I'm at a point where I've got the luxury and the liberty to be able to commit to make I would say, significant contribution.
So when you go around the hustings and you talk to people in your ward, I think it's still called wards.
Yes.
What are you hearing? What are their issues? What are they talking about? What's their problem?
The issue, the two issues, and they could be all one and the same, is that they feel that they are disconnected from their councillors and from the council, and I can understand why that is. The council at the moment is made up by 4 wards with 3 councillors per ward. So each ward is bigger than a state seat of parliament, and you've got 3 councillors with no one councillor responsible for any particular neighbourhood of interest, let's call it. So no one's accountable. They don't know who they should go speak to. So there's a disconnect. With the new council, with the election that's coming up the restructure of council is such that there are now going to be 11 wards with one councillor per ward. So that will help fix that problem. The second thing that I'm hearing is that they feel the council is not focusing on the areas of their that are their areas of responsibility, that the councillors are starting to get ahead of themselves and are worrying about what's happening in the Gaza and moving notices of motion and setting up petitions to send to the Prime Minister on issues that local government in City of Great Geelong will have no influence over. They're not happy with that. They want the councillors to focus on the basic services that the City of Great Geelong should be responsible for, such as planning, such as kindergarten, the roads, the collection of rubbish, the footpath, the rates, the basic infrastructure. The focus should be on the areas of responsibility that are those of local government, and then leave state and federal issues to the next levels of government, and not blur the lines between those levels. So they're the two big keys that I'm hearing, David, the two key issues.
So really, to summarize that, it's fix your own backyard and stay in your own backyard as the local government. Don't go popping over the fence and telling the state guys what to do, or over the next fence and tell the Fed guys what to do. Focus on doing the job you're paid to do.
That's right. Back to basics. Just stick to the jurisdiction that is local government and focus on that. Exactly.
That's that you've had this wonderful career. You've had a wonderful life. And as I say, it's almost the equivalent of 5 normal people's lives. But I'd like to sort of come back to this idea that if you had the opportunity to talk to a younger version of you, let's say someone in their 15 or 20 or something or other, or you might be in midterm, where you're sort of in your 30s and 40s, what would you say are the top 2 or 3 things that you would say to a younger version of yourself about what you would do differently?
Yeah, there's 2 things there. Is life lessons and what I do differently. The first one is to take responsibility for your life. That'll give you the greatest satisfaction because you're taking control of your life. So of course, things are going to challenges and obstacles will come our way, and nothing goes smoothly. But I think what I think about is that everything that occurs in your life, how you respond to that will determine the outcome. So I always keep that in my mind. Anything that happens, whether it's good or bad, it's how you respond to that will determine then ultimately the outcome. But so in other words, you are responsible ultimately for the outcome. And I think if you own that, if you accept that you own the outcome, that is very empowering for me. And even if it doesn't work out, then you've only got yourself to blame. Don't look to blame others. Always look to yourself for the good or the bad. Then as far as the next one would be pursue what's meaningful to you. So why am I running for another stint at local government? Because for me, it's what is meaningful for me, and I feel it's my purpose. It's what gets me particularly energized and excited, to the extent that it doesn't feel like a job, or no aspect of it is too hard. So you've just got to find what that is. What's that path? You've got to choose the path that's of least resistance and gives you the most gratification. So you've got to identify what that is. Don't sit around doing dead-end work just because of the pay. Now, I go to a sort of a fork in my road. When I was a partner in a private law firm, it was very profitable, but it would be what I would describe as profitable drudgery. I could have kept doing it for the rest of my life, and I could have been sitting here now, and I would have been very comfortable, having had a great profitable life, but now reflecting back at the age of 62, to back to when I made the decision to leave that when I was 40, it would have been a wasted 22 years. Whereas having then pursued this life, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I resigned from the partnership, and I made it my mission to go with the flow, let's say. And I guess just embrace your potential and face any challenges head on is probably the third thing that I'd say. Would be, they're the three things that I guess I'd give. I would give by way of advice to a younger self. As far as what was the question? What would I not do? Or what would I do different?
Yes. What would be your tips about?
I guess what I'd do different is I would have probably from a life perspective, nothing really, but I probably would have invested more deeply and not been as reticent, and would have had, I suppose, more. I would have backed myself a little bit more with some of the investment decisions that I'd made. Not to say that it hasn't all worked out, but I always had them. I always sort of kept one foot on first base, which ultimately, I suppose, it's all worked out. But I could have probably achieved more that way. But we all could have, couldn't we? When's enough? I guess that's the point.
Yes.
And I've got myself to a point where I've discovered what I need by way of liberty, and that is to be able to live the life that I want on my own terms, and to be able to pursue now in the manner that I wish, and to be self-funded in whatever I want to do. So I guess I've achieved liberty financially ultimately as well, even though I could have been more aggressive, I guess.
So really, you remind me of that Latin saying, carpe diem, which is really make the most of your opportunities. And from day one to today, at every point, you seem to have taken that saying, that piece of Latin, make the most of your opportunities at every step. And I think you've got a wonderful story, and a wonderful story for listeners who are still listening, about some tips about how to review what they've done, review what they can do in the future. And we should make a time to explore again in the future a bit more about some of the steps that you've taken in your life, because really we could do a number of these, Srech, and still not capture everything. But I think it's been wonderful today to catch up with you, to explore as we have at this level, and provide the tips that you have for those who are listening today. Thank you very much for your time, and let's catch up soon.
Yeah, thank you, David. I enjoyed the catch up.
Thank you. Bye.